Hi guys, this is Miss Vance again. The second part of notes on Unit 14 is about plant reproduction and responses. So we're going to look at how many plants reproduce and how plants respond to external signals. So in most of the plants we're familiar with, those are flowering plants. The flower is the organ where sexual reproduction occurs. In angiosperms, which are the flowering plants, it works pretty much the same way in all of these kind of plants, except the flowers may be a little bit different from one plant to the next. It's a little bit different in gymnosperms, which are like pine trees and fir trees, but similar in that they do produce seeds, except they produce seeds in cones instead of in fruits. Generally speaking, flowers have these floral organs that are made of modified leaves. Okay, you have sepals that enclose the bud. That's the little leaves that cover the bud of the flower. Petals, which are often colorful and fragrant, because that actually attracts pollinators. Pollinators are like insects and birds, and sometimes other kinds of animals as well. A stamen is the male part of the flower. The stamen is made of the anther, which produces the pollen, these little sacs up here at the top, and the filament, which holds them up above the base of the flower. The carpel is the female part of the flower, and it's got a long slender neck called the style, and at the top of it is the stigma, which is sticky where the pollen can stick to it. And then you have the ovary at the bottom that contains the ovules. The ovules will produce the developing egg and sporting cells. The anther will produce the pollen, which contains the sperm nuclei. And so there you have the male gamete and the female gamete that can combine together through fertilization, through pollination in the case of flowers, to produce the embryo, which will then be enclosed in a seed, which contains inside of a fruit. So pollination is how this works. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from anther to stigma. There are different ways this happens. Oftentimes it is by means of insects or birds, sometimes small mammals like bats. The fertilization occurs as a result of the pollination, the pollen being transferred. The fertilized egg divides and becomes an embryo, and the embryo will be contained inside of a seed, okay, which then will be stored inside the ovary, which develops into a fruit. So the changes after the seeds are produced, or while they're developing, then the fertilization also causes the flower's ovary to grow and mature into a fruit, which is the transport vesicle for the seeds. Ovaries develop into fruits, and that's the definition of a fruit. Fruit is a mature ovary that contains the seeds, okay? And the main function of fruits is actually to disperse the seeds. Fruits include all the things that you see here, things that you normally think of as fruits, many others that you think of as vegetables, like tomatoes and avocados. Those are also fruits because they're the ripened ovary containing the seeds. A little bit of terminology here. Oftentimes in terms of culinary decisions, we talk about fruits and vegetables. A vegetable is any part of the plant. Well, generally, if you think about vegetable as being things that aren't sweet, like we expect fruits to be. But the fruit, in terms of biology, is a botanical term. The botanical definition of fruit is the ripened ovary containing the seeds. And so that's different than the culinary definition of a fruit. Even nuts are fruits, okay, because they contain the seeds inside them. Other parts of the plants that we do eat are like sometimes the roots, like carrots and beets and turnips and things like that. Sometimes they're stems, like asparagus and celery, and sometimes they're things like the flowers, like broccoli and cauliflower are flowers. And so we eat different parts of the plant. When we're talking in biology, when we're talking about a fruit, we're talking about, again, the ripened ovary containing the seeds. The general life cycle of plants, flowering plants, is kind of like this. Here's the mature plant with the flowers. That's where fertilization occurs. Once fertilization occurs, the embryo starts to develop, and changes occur in the ovary as a result of the pollination that causes the ovary to ripen into a fruit. and the fruit contains the seed contains an embryo as well as a food supply and supporting cells there. You can plant the seed and it will germinate into a new plant, which can then grow and develop and produce its own flowers to reproduce. Pretty simple. So you might have noticed in the previous slide, let me switch back to that real quick, some things that really don't look like seeds, fruits. For instance, this is a maple fruit, and it basically looks like a little helicopter wings. Okay, there are the seeds right there, and the ovary actually develops into these little wing-like structures, and it actually does kind of fly or flutter in the wind and move from place to place. So the purpose of a fruit not only encloses the seeds, but it also allows for the dispersal of the seeds, sometimes by wind or water, sometimes by just allowing it to fall and plant in the ground, sometimes in the case of a sweet or a fleshy fruit, maybe by animals. So when the animals eat the fruits, they'll eat them far away from the tree, and they'll deposit the seeds usually when they eliminate their waste in their feces. And so oftentimes or they'll drop seeds as they're eating the fruit, and so that allows the seeds to be dispersed to other locations and make more plants of the same kind. There are other things that we need to know about plants in addition to reproduction, and that is that plants also have hormones, believe it or not. They have several different kinds of hormones, and these are like we see in animals. They're signaling mechanisms. Basically, they can transmit information about their outside environment to the organs, allowing the plant to respond as needed to whatever is necessary in its environment to respond to. And they trigger various kinds of signal pathways, and they mostly control plant growth and development, which is how plants manage to respond to things. Since plants don't have a nervous system, they can't pick up and walk here and there, but they do have a way to respond to things, and their way to respond sometimes involves growth, sometimes involves movement. Auxin is one of the major categories of plant hormones. Auxins are ones that are chemicals that promote the elongation of seeds. They have multiple functions, but that's one of the main things they do. The meristem at the tip of the shoot, the meristem is the area, that's another type of tissue that allows for the plant to grow. Those are the places where there's active mitosis going on to grow. The auxins weaken the cell walls, allowing them to stretch up. When they take up water, they can stretch and grow taller. And so auxins generally are going to promote the elongation of the stem. A second kind of hormone that's found in plants is the cytokines. Cytokines stimulate cell division. They're going to be produced in the actively growing tissues, like at the terminal bud of the plant or at the tips of the roots, also in embryos and in fruits. And they basically promote cytokinesis and cell differentiation, and so that's how plants grow and differentiate into different organs. The cytokines from the roots help to balance the auxin is produced also in the apical meristem, and that causes sometimes the lower buds to develop into branches rather than just having one long stem like that. Gibberellins are another kind of hormone. Gibberellins affect stem elongation and also have other effects. They stimulate the growth of stems and leaves and the development of fruits. They're released from embryos. Some of the early stages of germination from seeds definitely produces some gibberellins there to stimulate the growth of the plant. Gibberellins are involved in plant growth, and so a lot of times you see, for instance, if you see commercials on TV or you know something about fertilizing your garden at home, oftentimes you get fertilizer that's like Miracle-Gro or something like that. Those often have hormones like gibberellins in there that stimulates the growth of the plants and increases the size of the plants and the size of the fruit that can be produced from it. Another hormone or hormone-like substance is abscisic acid. Abscisic acid inhibits germination, and it's involved in determining whether seeds remain dormant or germinate in relationship with gibberellins. Okay, there are a lot of plant seeds that stay dormant until either their abscisic acid is washed away or something else happens like that to allow them to bloom after a sudden rain. So oftentimes you see the picture at the bottom here is of a desert that's in bloom. Oftentimes you don't see much color in a desert until it does rain, and when it does rain you have growth really fast and the production of flowers in a very, very big way shortly after a rain because the abscisic acid has been washed away from the seeds and allowed them to grow. Another substance that is produced by fruit ripening is ethylene. Ethylene is a gas, and it's not really a hormone, but it has a similar hormone effect, okay? And it triggers fruit ripening and other kind of age processes. If you buy, for instance, bananas or avocados or something that are not quite ripe yet, you can put them in a brown bag, and especially if you put them in the brown bag with something like an apple, and the brown bag will trap the ethylene and enhance and speed up the ripening process. And so that's really important if we want to ripen our fruits. But also it's involved in like color changes in the winter or in the fall when the leaves change color. The ratio there of auxin to ethylene changes as time goes on, and that's triggered by the shorter days, of course, in the autumn, and so that allows for the change in the color of the leaves, and then the leaves falling off of deciduous trees, ones that lose their leaves in the winter. Another thing that we learn about plants that we often don't realize is that plants are also able to respond more quickly to things. They have various kinds of growth responses to things called tropisms. And the GIFs that you see on this slide here, they're kind of fun to watch, but they're showing some of the various kinds of movements that you see in plants. There is an activity that you'll do in this unit that lets you look at some of those responses in plants at a website called Plants in Motion, and so you'll learn some things about that. But we'll talk about the basic types of tropisms in this part of the notes and see what kinds of responses plants actually have. So tropisms are allowing plant growth either toward or away from a stimulus. You probably have seen plants that are left in place for a while that tend to grow at an angle, like it's the ones you see up here, toward the light. If they remain in the same position all the time, they're going to have a tendency to bend toward the light. That's because when the sunlight is on one side, what happens on the shady side is the IAA molecules, okay, the auxins basically, that are produced by the apical meristem basically move to the shady side and cause cell elongation on the shady side. And when those cells get longer and the cells on the sunny side don't get longer, that causes the stem to bend toward the light. This is called phototropism, okay, bending in response to light. Tropisms also can have different kinds of effects. The response to gravity is called gravitropism, or also called geotropism, and that is caused by the settling of organelles on the low sides as a response to gravity, and that can trigger a change in the hormone distribution that is there. And so that's why roots grow down and stems grow up. Roots exhibit positive gravitropism because they're growing toward gravity, toward the force of gravity, and stems exhibit negative gravitropism in that they have a tendency to grow away from the force of gravity. Another kind of tropism is called thigmotropism. Thigmotropism is a response to touch, and that's what causes these tendrils and vines to coil around objects. You also see in one of those GIFs that you saw someone touching the leaves of the mimosa, causing the leaflets to fold up, and that's also a type of thigmotropism in the response to touch. There are also internal clocks in plants, believe it or not. They have kind of a biological clock, sort of like we do, that controls movements and other daily cycles in plants. These are called circadian rhythms. Circadian comes from Latin words circa, which means round, and dia, which means day. So these are they have periods of about 24 hours around the day, okay? And even when you don't have environmental cues like the sun going down and coming up, some of these plants, like the one that are shown here in these pictures, have these cues that basically tell them to fold their leaves down because it's midnight, and to raise them up because now it's in the middle of the daytime. And that keeps them synchronized with day and night so that they can take advantage of the sunlight and then not expend energy holding the leaves up in the nighttime when it's not going to help them undergo photosynthesis. And that's the last we have about plant tropisms.